Hello and welcome to part 3 of my dev container tutorial. So in the first video I showed you an outlook of what we're going to accomplish. In the second video we set out to create a Docker file and a Docker compose file to create our development image from which we are running containers. And now the final piece which is missing is the dev container config. But before we add this and turn our container into a full dev container setup, I want to show you one other way you can use to create dev containers. So if you don't want to go fully customized from scratch, like I showed you in the second video, you can also just go Ctrl+Shift+P. And since we have the dev containers extension installed, I showed this in the first video, you can directly go to rebuild and reopen in container. And now since we don't have a configuration here, it will ask you what you want to do. And let's just add a configuration to this workspace. And now you have a complete set of configurations from which you can choose and pick. So if you do so, you'll already get the proper files and you can later edit those. There's a whole bunch of dev containers which you can choose here, and then you don't have to do what we did in the second video where we went fully custom and created our Ubuntu image from scratch. Here you can just get something ready to use. And I also want to show you, you can also find those online. Have a look, get inspired by how those dev containers are set up. So let me quickly show you. So if you go to the official Microsoft GitHub, you see VS Code Dev Containers repository. And in here, under the containers folder, you see there is a whole bunch of boilerplates for different projects. And if we click on one of those, let's for example take here Java, we look at the Docker file, you see it's not pulling from the Docker Hub, it's pulling from Microsoft's own registries. Those images are already prepared to include some additional packages. But what we want to do, we want to understand how to build our own, to go fully customized. So let's get back to our dev container and now add the final missing piece, one file which is called devcontainer.json. And this here is where we add the real configuration, which is then picked up by Visual Studio Code to start our dev container. First of all, we give it a name, call it MeBrite Web Tooling. We base it on a Docker compose file, so we want to use Docker compose to start the containers here. You could also base it on a Docker file or directly on an image. A Docker compose file is Docker compose YML. And then we have to specify the service inside this Docker compose file that contains our dev container. Because remember, we have multiple services in this Docker compose file, and only one of those is the service we use as dev container. And here we take this name here, which we defined. And also very important, we have to specify the workspace folder. And this one is the folder into which we mounted our development content here. So this here, this home develop. Now we also want to define a shutdown action. So to stop compose is also a predefined action here. And with this, we can already run our dev container. So we will extend this configuration, but for now, just want to quickly see what this does. Press Ctrl+Shift+P, rebuild and reopen in container. And now you see, instead of asking us to pick one from the public repository, from the public registry, it directly starts here reading our configuration because it now finds it, and then building and running our containers. Now, since I was running this for the first time, this took a while, but as you can see now again, we're here in Ubuntu. Inside our dev container, we have everything mounted, and you also see node modules is empty because inside of the container, I haven't yet installed it. So npm I to install the node modules. And here we go. We're now ready and then can run the gulp build command. Let's just do that, gulp. So this builds my homepage. And also if we head over to Chrome, localhost 8080, here we see our content served. Now, one thing we haven't done yet, we haven't set up anything, so no extensions. So if we go here to the extensions, you see that here the dev container doesn't have any extensions yet, but we want them. Also, we don't have any specific settings to format the different files with specific formatters. So this is now what we're going to do next. So we go again here into the devcontainer.json, and we can do this inside of the dev container, and we add some additional sections. First of all, we have to bind Docker because we installed Docker inside of the container. But if I do docker ps, it says cannot connect to Docker daemon because we didn't connect the Docker socket. So we want to connect our Docker to the host's Docker socket. And for this, we can use a mount section here. And this is similar to the mounting in Docker Compose. Let me just pass it in here. So the mount section as a source here, the double forward slashes. This is for Windows. For Linux or Mac, I think you just have one forward slash. So you have to check if the 2 slashes also work. But that's the location for the host's socket, so the source. And here's the target socket. This is where it's running inside of our container. And I want to do a second mount because I also want to have the SSH keys passed to our internal SSH agent. So for it, I get the SSH keys from my host system and mount them to the SSH of the root. This way, when I run SSH or git commands inside of the container, it can pick up the SSH keys that I've set up in my root system. So those 2 mounts, the first thing also when I save it, Visual Studio Code notices, okay, we're inside the container. Do you want to rebuild? Basically, yes, but we first want to do some other things, some additional settings. And this is, we want to add a customizations section. And we want to customize VS Code. And inside of it, we want to install some extensions. And the extensions I want to install, I'll just copy this code now. So to find those strings here, you go to the extensions and you find the extension you want to install. For example, let's take here this ESLint. If I click on such an extension, here on the side, if you scroll down, you always find this identifier. And this is what you use here in the dev container. So you see here, this is the string I just showed you. And you do this for all the extensions you want to install. Now, this is the first thing we want to do. Second thing, we also want to provide some settings. So setting up all the default formatters. So let's add a settings section. And yet again, I'll just copy and paste my setup here, which is specific to my environment. But this is basically what you would set up in the settings JSON files of Visual Studio Code. So you can Google how to do this, what to add here, and this will then be applied inside of the dev container. Now with this all active, I've saved. Let's just rebuild the container. And this will not have to rebuild the images for the container because those didn't change. I didn't make changes to the Docker file in this case, but it will reinstall the Visual Studio server in the container and make sure all the extensions are installed. And the container is now restarted. Now if we go to the extensions, you see we have now the locally installed extensions, but also here inside of the dev container we have the extensions. And now if I go, for example, to one of my Python files, let's just find Gallery Manager. First of all, now linting becomes active here. So it tells me, first of all, that's wrong. And now when I save, the black formatter will automatically update it. You see now the tools I installed are now automatically active also for JavaScript. If I change something and save, automatically be formatted. And the same is true for Nunjucks and all the other tools I'm using. Now what's left to do, I want to push my image to the Docker registry, so we don't need to use here the Docker file and every time build, but instead can use an image. So first of all, since we've connected the Docker socket, I'm still inside the dev container, but I can now run commands like docker ps, and I can also create an image. So we're already running inside of the dev container, so an image has been created as part of Docker Compose, but we now want to create a separate tagged image and push this to the Docker registry. So I go into the dev containers folder and use our build command again, docker build, and I call this me bright web dev. Now we check the Docker images and we see up here at the top there's the image, and actually I didn't even have to rebuild it. So it didn't change since the last time, which was in video number 2, so where I already built it. Anyways, this is the tag of the image I want to push to the Docker registry now. So if I head to Docker Hub, where I have an account, where you can also get an account, if you have a free account, what you can do, you can create repositories. And I already created one, which I also called me bright web dev. And let's just click on this again. It says you can create public repositories with a free account as many as you want, I guess. But you can also create a private repository, but this is limited if you just run the free account. But here I want a public one because I want to make this available for everybody who uses my homepage template. I already created this, as I said. And if I click on it, it tells me what I need to do to push my image to this. So Docker push, then specify destination and the tag name. So let's just do this now here from the Docker container. Now this will not work out of the box because the tag name is just, as you can see here, latest, but I don't have an image with this format. So mine is called mebright-webdev. And what I have to do first, let's Ctrl+C here, I have to retag this image. And we do this by using docker tag mebright-webdev. And now we want to retag it to mebright/mebright-webdev. So first the user, then the repository name, and then the tag. See if this worked. Yes, here we have the retagged image. And now we can try again. And now we can use the Docker push. This now uploads everything to the Docker registry, which will take some time because I don't have the highest bandwidth here. So the image has finally been pushed to the Docker registry. Let's have a look. You see now here I have one tag, one image added to my repository, which means I can now also directly use it, which I'll do now inside of my homepage template and also in my homepage and other projects I have which need the same tools. What I could also do, I could use this as a base image, and if I need additional tools, I can add layers on top. So let's now head here into the Docker Compose file. And here, instead of build, we do the same as we did down here for the web test. We use image, and here we do mebright/mebright-webdev latest. Let's save it. Ctrl+Shift+P and rebuild the container and see if it works. And once more, we're back inside of the container. So what I'll now do, I'll add those to my repository. So if you're interested, you can now check out my homepage template and get access to all those files. You can also take those, edit those. You now know how to build your custom environment from scratch. Yeah, and this brings us to the end of this little tutorial series. I hope you liked it. If so, make sure leave a thumbs up. Yeah, check out the code, experiment with it, leave comments, and see you in the next one. Bye.